Hello students and welcome back to my video, and today we are going to discuss about the study of poetry written by Matthew Arnold. And there are some questions which arises like discuss Matthew Arnold view on characteristic of good poetry. Or like poetry is a criticism of life governed by laws of poetry, poetic truth and poetic beauty. Discuss real estimate, the only one is liable to be superseded if we are not watchful by the king's estimated, the historic estimate, and the personal estimate, both of which are fallacious. Discuss an owl view of the historic and the personal and real, and like some elucidate Arnold view on good poetry as the superior character of truth and seriousness in the matter and substance of the best poetry, and is inseparable from the superiority of diction and movement marked in its style manner with references essay on the study of poetry. So these are some questions which came into the examination paper. There are some more questions which arises. Arnold touchstone method, like Arnold view of Chaucer as a poet, Arnold view on a page on Age of Dryden and Pope, Arnold view on Robert Burns as a poet, like Arnold as a critic and his limitation and legacies. So in Victorian criticism, like art and morality, art for life's sakes, Carl and Ruskin, modern point of view should be the benchmark to judge the work of literature. Art should be the betterment of life. Art and aesthetic pleasure, art for art's sake. Walter and Peter Oscar Wilde, aesthetic and artistic delight should be the benchmark to judge the work of literature. Art should be delight and pleasure for mankind. And in Golden Mean, Matthew Arnold in 1822 and 1888. So Matthew Arnold as a critic, the business of criticism, he says, is neither to find fault nor to display the critic own learning or influence. It is to know the best which has been taught and said in the world, and by using this knowledge to create the current a fresh and free thought. So the study of poetry, the first essay in 1888 volume was originally published as the general introduction to D.H. Ward's anthology, the English poets in 1880. And his classicism, he did not make the spasmodic expression of romanticism. He advocated discipline in writing and recommended the classical writers. So W.J. Long, we cannot speak the confidence of his rank in literature, but by his crystal clear style, his scientific study of inquiry and comparison, illuminated here and there by the play of humor and especially by his broad sympathy and intellectual culture, he seemed destined to occupy a very high place among the masters of literary criticism. The first great principle of criticism enacted by Arnold is that of disinterestedness or detachment. Disinterestedness on the part of his critic implies freedom from all prejudices, personal or historical. Now came on future of poetry. The future of poetry is immense because in poetry, our race, as time goes on, we will find an ever surer and super surer state. There is not a creed which is not shaken, but for poetry, the idea is everything. The rest is a world of illusion, of divine illusion. Poetry attaches to his emotion to the idea. The idea is a fact. And the strongest part of our religion is today is its unconscious poetry. So we have to turn poetry to interpret life for us, to console us, to sustain us. And without poetry, our science will appear incomplete. And most of us, what now possesses with us for religion and philosophy, will be replaced by poetry. He says poetry is a criticism of life. Arnold asserts that literature, especially the poetry, it is a criticism of life. In poetry, this criticism of life must conform to the law of poetic truth and poetic beauty. Truth and seriousness of matter facility and perfection of diction and manner, as are exhibited in the best poets, are what constituted a criticism of life. He says poetry interprets life in two ways: poetry interpretative by having natural magic in it and moral profundity. And to achieve this, poet must aim at high and excellent seriousness in all that he writes. He demand has two essential qualities. The first is the choice of excellent actions. The poet must choose those which most powerful appeal to the great primary human feeling which subsists permanently in the race. And the second essential is what Arnold called the grand style, the perfection of form, choice of words, drawing its force directly from the matter which it conveys. The key components of poetry are the superior character of truth and seriousness in the matter of substance of the best poetry is inseparable from the superiority of diction and movement, marking its style and manner. He described the touchstone matter, his general principles, touchstone, which introduced the scientific objectivity to critical evaluation by providing comparison and analysis as the two primary tools for judging individual poets. The Chaucer, Dryden, Pope, and Shelley fall short for the best because they lack high seriousness, and Arnold ideal poets are Homer and Sophocles in the ancient world. Dante and Milton are among modern, Goethe and Wordsworth. So Anal put Wordsworth in the front rank not for his poetry but for his criticism of life. Fallacies of real estimate Arnold, while giving his touchstone method, makes reader aware of his fallacy in judgment. He is one of the view that historical fallacy, personal fallacy, masks the real estimate of the poetry. While expressing his views of the historic, personal, and real, he writes that in reading poetry, a sense for the best is really excellent, and for the strength and joy to be drawn from it should be present in our mind and should govern our estimate of what we read. But this real estimate is only true one is liable to be superseded if we are not watchful by other kind of estimate, the historic estimate and the personal estimate, both of which are fallacious. He says on Chaucer, praises Chaucer's excellent style and manner, but he says that Chaucer cannot be called classical since, unlike Homer, Virgil, and Shakespeare, his poetry does not have the high poetic seriousness, which Aristotle regards as the mark of its superiority over the other arts. He says on Dryden Pope, hence we regard Dryden as the glorious founder and Pope as the splendid high priest at the age of prose and reason or dispensable 18th century. Their poetry was that of the builders of an age of poet and reason. Arnold says that Poet and Dryden are not poet classics but the prose classics of the 18th century. He says on Thomas Gray, as for poetry, he considered Gray to be the only classic of the 18th century. Gray constantly studied and enjoyed Greek poetry and thus inherited their poetic point of view and their application of poetry to life, but he is the scantiest, frailest classic since his output was small. He says on Robert Burns, like Chaucer, Burns lack high poetic seriousness through his poem and have poetic truth in diction and movement. Also, like Chaucer, Burns possesses largeness, benignity about the freedom and spontaneity, but instead of Chaucer fluidity, we find in Burns a springing, bounding energy. Chaucer's benignity deepens in Burns into a sense of sympathy for both human as well as non-human things, but the Chaucer world is richer and fairer than that of Burns. Sometimes Burns' poetic genius is unmatched by anyone and is even better than good at times, and he is unrivaled by anyone except Shakespeare. Arnold praised Shakespeare that in England there is a need of miracle of genius like Shakespeare to produce a balance of mind. This is a praise tempered by a critical sense. In a letter he writes, "I keep saying Shakespeare, you are as obscure as life is." In his sonnet on Shakespeare, he says, "On other abide our question, though are free, we ask and ask, though smileless and art still out-topping knowledge." So there is a criticism in his viewpoint, like all criticism of life is often marked by his name moralizing by his inadequate perception of the relation between art and morality, by his uncritical admiration of what he regarded as the golden sanity of the ancient Greek. For all his companionship and disinterest, Arnold was also unable to practice disinterest in all his essays. In his essay, on Shelley particularly, he displayed the lamentable lack of disinterest in his Shelley moral point of view were too much for the Victorian Arnold. In his essay on needs, Arnold failed to be disinterested. The sentimental letters of Keats to Fanny Browne were too much for him, but Arnold insisted on the standard and his concern over the relation between the poetry and life, making one of the great modern critics. So, John Salisbury, English history of English criticism. All literature is the application of ideas of life, and to say that poetry is the application of ideas to life under conditions fixed for poetry is simply a vain repetition. And on T.S. Eliot, his observation that poetry is a criticism of life is repeating Aristotle. Nothing novel is contributed as a criticism. So these are the some viewpoints on what he has mentioned in the study of poetry and discussing about the various poets of that time and their appreciation and what he appreciated in the poetry. So I hope you like the video and like the main points. And for anything, you can ask me in the chat box. And please like, share, and subscribe my channel. Thank you.